Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast about foreign policy and world affairs. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg, editor of UN Dispatch. And in this show, we discuss topical global issues, have conversations with foreign affairs thought leaders and newsmakers, and give you the context you need to understand the world today. Go to globaldispatchespodcast.com to learn more. And now on with the show. My guest today, Jan Steckel, along with his research collaborator, Michael Jakob, are coordinating a series of global case studies to understand the non-economic factors associated with investment in coal-fired power. We know that countries around the world sometimes favor coal because it's cheaper. But their research aims to pinpoint some of the political forces that drive investment in coal. Their research examines what interests and actors make investment in coal, or sometimes divestment, politically so attractive. And in so doing, they identify possible entry points for policies that can nudge countries away from coal. Their series of global case studies includes over a dozen countries with collaborators from all corners of the world using a political economy framework developed by Jan Steckel and Michael Jakob's team at the Mercator Institute. And Jan Steckel is head of the Working Group on Climate and Development at the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and Climate Change. He joins me today as part of a series of episodes that showcase the research and work of the Sustainable Energy Transitions Initiative, SETI. SETI is an interdisciplinary global collaborative that aims to foster research on energy access and energy transitions in low and middle-income countries. Currently, SETI is housed at Duke University, where it is led by Professors Subrendu Patanayak and Mark Juland. To learn more about SETI, follow them on Twitter at SETI Energy. And now here is my conversation with Jan Steckel of the Mercator Institute.
Basically, we see new coal investments all over Asia. So, of course, this is largely dominated by China. But it's not only China, it's also India, and it's all kinds of newly industrializing countries on the continent, including Vietnam, including Bangladesh, including Indonesia. This is the countries where we currently see coal investments going on and still going online.
One point that you make in your research, and that is pointed out in a number of papers that you've written, is that if these coal investments are seen through, they would basically eat up the entire carbon budget forecasted in the Paris Agreement.
That's right. It always depends a little bit on various factors, right? So nobody knows how long a coal-fired power plant that is built today or planned today will run in the end. But usually, like looking into historical lifetimes, and we would say, well, the coal-fired power plant on average runs about 40 years. And if we take this as a basis, then we have to say that what is currently under construction and in the pipeline, so that is what is announced, what is in pre-permit or just permitted, has the power to seriously challenge the available carbon budget that we still have to achieve the 1.5 target, and also will make achieving a 2-degree target quite difficult. So let me just illustrate you this by a few numbers, if that's all right. So
please.
For achieving 1.5 degrees, so it depends a little bit how you calculate, and there are, of course, uncertainties. But so we still have about 400 gigatons that we can put into the atmosphere. Imagine that we have a certain budget that we still can put in the atmosphere to achieve those temperature targets. Don't nail me down to the particular gigatons. As I said, there are uncertainties, but this is about 400 gigatons for 1.5. So what is currently expected to be emitted from the existing fleet of coal-fired power plants is 200 approximately. So this eats up 50%. And what we have in the pipeline is about 75 gigatons if we include the plants that are shelved. So we already don't really know whether they will be built in the end. It's around 100 gigatons. So and this is just coal. This is not anything else. This is not considering the transportation sector. It's not looking into natural gas. It is not looking into other sectors such as buildings, etc. It's just coal. And you can see that this is actually then shrinking the available rest for all the other sectors to a real minimum.
If these coal plants come online and last as long as you might expect them to last, that's it. That's basically you can kiss the Paris targets goodbye.
Basically, yes. But as I said, like this hinges on the critical assumptions that coal-fired power plants run those 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
If we manage also looking into the existing fleet to shut down plants early, and this looks a little bit more relaxed. And I mean, there is nothing that from an economic point of view, etc., or a technical point of view, would tell us this is absolutely impossible. So we always also need to see these numbers from this perspective, right? There are kind of, you can think of policy instruments, you can think of other factors that make people shut down those power plants early. But we will need to see that in the next 10, 20, 30 years if we want to achieve the Paris targets.
So you've done some cutting edge research on some of the sort of politics surrounding investment in coal in some of the countries that you cited earlier in Asia, and why these countries keep investing in coal for their energy. Before you discuss the political dynamics that make coal attractive in these countries, can you just discuss some of the economic reasons why coal remains an attractive investment in some of these countries compared to, say, renewables?
Yeah. So if you compare renewables to coal, then people often just look into, let's say, the life cycle cost of electricity over the entire lifetime. But we need to be careful here that if you look into coal versus renewables, then you have very different cost structures, right? So the costs of renewables basically all come up front. You build a wind turbine, and then that's basically, yes, you have a little bit of operational maintenance cost, but this is actually a minor part. So basically, that also means you have to put the money on the table up front. For a coal-fired power plant, that looks very different. So a lot of the money you have to spend over the lifetime is in the fuel. So that means that you need to finance per whatever kilowatt or gigawatt of capacity, you need to finance less upfront. Why is that important? It's important because whereas in the US and Europe, we have very low interest rates at the moment. For us, it's easy, or for European and US investors in the US and Europe, it's easy to get capital. Also, like institutions are working there, more or less stable regulatory frameworks, etc. So this all actually brings down the risk for the investors. This is a totally different story in a country like Vietnam or Bangladesh or Pakistan. And here, like, investors need to pay really high interest. Risks are high. That also leads to high capital costs in the end. And then actually the balance tips, and coal can actually, based on these factors, still be attractive.
But economics is not the only reason that coal remains attractive in many of these places. Your research demonstrates some of the political dynamics that make countries continue to invest in coal. Can you just describe what the sort of political forces at work are in, say, a country like Vietnam, which I know was a case study of yours? Why is it, beyond the economic factors, that politics are in favor of coal investments right now?
So before I answer this question, let me just shortly sketch how we think about this problem, because I think it then also helps in understanding a little bit better how we, or what we understand under these politics and political economy factors that lead to continuous coal investments. So we basically imagine this decision process to be very much a focus of, or like very much driven by the objectives that particular political actors have. What do I mean by this? Is that we imagine, or like we build a framework or a model where we say, well, we think, or we assume that all kinds of political and societal actors have multiple objectives, such as, for example, they want economic growth, they want electrification, etc., etc. However, how they weigh these different objectives is different. And this depends on the context of a country. It depends on which societal actors they feel are most relevant for them. Let me give you an example. More left-leaning, maybe social democratic politician will, of course, be interested in growth, in like flourishing industry, etc. But they will particularly listen probably to what unions have to say. We went to various countries, in total 18, and applied this framework, talked to people and tried to find out what are actually factors that are now relevant for coal being so sticky. The interesting thing now is that, like in Vietnam, there, for example, one very important objective for policymakers in Vietnam is not only cheap electricity prices, but also availability of electricity. Because actually you have to imagine that the ruling party, the Communist Party of Vietnam, feels to be basically kind of like having signed, like nobody said this that explicitly, but it often came up that they feel a little bit like having signed a kind of a deal with the people of Vietnam. So we rule the country, and we basically have set up a more or less authoritarian regime, but we also guarantee growth, we guarantee development, we guarantee that basically Vietnam is prospering, and it is. So for them, it seems to be extremely important that people can afford electricity, that people have access to electricity, etc. And I think the nightmare, or what also we could find out of this interview, some interviewee said, okay, it's all about keeping the lights on. So their nightmare is that they have blackouts. And there's a couple of reasons to believe that this is not so unlikely in Vietnam, given that quite a bit of their power system relies on hydro, and the functioning of these hydro dams is dependent on an increasingly unstable monsoon season, and also they have a disparity between like the where the electricity is needed, the growing industrial centers in the south, and where it is generated more in the north. That said, this is extremely important for them. At the same time, Vietnam is then they are under high cost pressure. This is one thing. The second is that, let me put it like this, it's a revolving door policy between the regulator and the utility. So people know each other, they know each other from the same universities, the same party academies. They know that they will actually have, or they will be in the position of the guy they are currently regulating, maybe in 1 or 2 years from now. They will not make this guy's life particularly difficult from a regulating perspective. And then there is also and this is not only true for Vietnam, but one thing, and it is of course difficult to find this out in those interviews, but let me offer you my personal view on this. And this is, you can make a lot of profit out of coal, personal profit, profits from, it does not necessarily be open corruption, but it can be, where a coal-fired power plant is sited. You know it in advance, so you might buy the land, which all of a sudden increases incredibly in value. You know that there might be a coal-fired power plant built in a certain area, but there is no transport company in place that can actually deal with shipping coal or organizing the construction. So you make sure that you will be the one who owns this company, etc., etc. So this entire grid of vested interests is so strong that it goes very deep down into the regulation. So, and stabilize actually coal in a way that coal really has an advantage over other technologies. For example, in Vietnam, we have observed that for independent power producers that wanted to go into Vietnam, like if you were interested in building coal, you got a contract that guarantees you that your electricity will be bought and fed into the grid for the next 20 years. If you did the same for renewables, it was only guaranteed for 1 year. So this has, of course, incredible consequences for the risk premiums you have to pay and for the attractiveness of this investments.
I mean, it just sounds like many of the forces that you are describing are aligning in favor of coal to the exclusion of renewables, whether that's for, completely legitimate political reasons. The Vietnamese Communist Party wants to be responsive to its people, make sure there are no blackouts or power outages, and want to increase energy access to their people. But there's also these other kind of informal reasons that you describe that also apply pressure in favor of coal and against other renewables. Are these dynamics that you find in Vietnam also present in other countries in the region that you said earlier are also those countries that are investing more heavily in new coal development?
Absolutely. So this is not, and this is actually one of the most surprising findings for me, because when I thought about this before, I thought, okay, we probably will find some clusters that work along, let's say, maybe the political system. So democracies like Indonesia, it might work differently than from Vietnam, which is a more centralized, maybe also more authoritarian regime. But I'd say this is not necessarily a good explanation, or putting it differently, those countries are, when you look into the mechanics of the political economy, vested interests, etc., what stabilizes coal, they are remarkably similar. So maybe it is a little bit more open and openly discussed in a country such as Indonesia, but very similar dynamics are going on there. Let me just give you an example in terms of vested interest. So we found that in India, a couple of hundreds of the legislators in the federal parliament had direct ties to the coal industry. The same is true in Indonesia, where basically coal oligarchs are sitting in parliament and making the laws that are supposed to regulate themselves. In Indonesia, though, being a coal exporting country, one aspect is important, and this is the role of coal rents and revenues. So coal is one of the major export commodities of Indonesia, stabilizing the budget, and this money plays a very important role in kind of balancing various regional interests. There's a very complicated way how those revenues of coal are allocated, not only across the regions that produce coal, but also across the entire country. But still, I'd say that even though this might be a particularity of the exporting countries, an underlying reason, and that is the role of regions, can again be found in many countries. Let me give you an example why this is so important. And I think this is important when we think about also towards policies to phase out coal, right? So why is it so difficult to get rid of it is that even though there might only be very few people that benefit from coal today, often they have an extremely good lobby, or there are institutional channels to make them heard, make those people who would lose from the transition be kind of, let's say, overemphasized in the overall political process. And this is nothing that is maybe particular to developing countries. We have very similar dynamics here in Germany, and I think also in the US.
Oh yes, our coal-producing states are barely populated, but have equal representation in the United States Senate as everyone else. So yes, nothing I am unaware of.
With a split Senate, right, and like basically the senator of West Virginia becoming the kind of the marginal vote, right? So let's see how
the co-president we call him.
The co-president, yeah, exactly. No, and I think this is something, and this is also something that I take from this research, is that even like because if we take a too aggregated view on the situation, saying, well, why is it the problem with coal? It is dirty. It is expensive. We can phase it out easily. There are alternatives available, right? So, I mean, like if you think of decarbonization and achieving Paris, etc., like from a larger picture, and this is also what these models tell us that look into that, then phasing out coal actually is the no-brainer of it, right? So you basically build renewables or other low-carbon electricity generating technologies, and that's it. And let's focus on sectors that are more difficult. But that's actually not the case if you look into the details, if you look into the regional dynamics, if you look into the political economy.
Well. So then, to that end, I mean, what does your research suggest to you about what the international community might do to change some of the political incentives in a country like Indonesia or Vietnam away from the current structure, which is all lined up in favor of coal? Like, are there any potential areas for international intervention in some way that might nudge politics away from coal?
I think one important one is the basically providing or helping to provide the finance, provide the technology, make sure, and there's more to it than just phasing out finance to coal, which, by the way, is also an issue that we didn't discuss much about here, but like there is still also large financial flows stemming from OECD countries and going into these coal-fired power plants. But actually providing cheap loans for not only renewables themselves, but also for the infrastructure that is surrounded with it. So, for example, think of the transmission and distribution grids, think of storage, etc. But this is just the technological part of it. The other is that we, I think, need to assist those countries in finding ways how to manage those transitions politically. And that means, in the end, how to buy out the losers. And this might not always be nice. So, because I think it has various dimensions to it. It has one dimension for sure, let's say the dimension, the first order dimension, if you like, it's the workers, people who are employed in the coal industry today. But usually that's not so many people. And however, often in those regions, there are very little alternatives. For example, if you look into India, then you find, okay, a lot of people are employed in the coal sector in the poorer eastern Indian regions. The new jobs in renewables, for example, they would be in the south or in the west of the country. So those people will probably not profit from them.
Buying out the losers. The idea is you just provide some sort of soft landing for people displaced by a move away from coal.
That's right. However, have in mind that, this is already difficult in a country like Germany. We had a huge discussion about this. We're spending billions and billions of euros for doing this, and for, in the end, providing a soft landing for a couple of 10,000 people, which is very minor given the total labor force we have. But still, I think it is important to help them designing those soft landings, as you say. But this is only one side of the story. The second is, and this is something that popped up in so many countries, and this is the issue of cheap electricity, also with regard to households, because coal still is a way to provide relatively reliable and cheap electricity for households and for firms, of course, but for kind of compensating those households that would be hit hardest by a potential, at least short-term price increases, I think is also important. The third is to somehow deal with the question of, how to compensate the industry, not only the coal industry, but also the industry that is somehow related to the sector. Think of heavy industries such as steel, that sometimes rely directly on the coal sector. And I think managing those transitions is not at all easy. And the international community, by providing funds, but also knowledge, I think could help tremendously here.
Well, Jan, the research is absolutely fascinating. I'll certainly post links to it in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time. This was great.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. And
all right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Jan. And thank you to SETI for collaborating with the podcast around this series. You can view other episodes in this series by going to globaldispatchespodcast.com. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye.